People ask me for my secret. When you live to be 101, you become a kind of oracle, whether you want to or not. They expect me to talk about discipline, about the things I gave up. They want to hear about calorie charts and forbidden foods, a list of sacrifices. But I have to disappoint them. My secret is that I never denied myself a single thing I truly loved. For over a century, I've eaten butter, real butter. I've enjoyed red meat and potatoes and bread that tastes like bread. While the world outside was busy inventing new things to fear, we were in here, in this very kitchen, living. For 50 years, the experts have been warning us about the very things that built my life. They warned me about saturated fat, but they never warned me about a life without flavor, a life without joy. They were treating the wrong disease all along, you see. The sickness isn't in our food. It's in our fear of it. This house is quiet now. Every floorboard holds a memory, every chair an echo. It's been years since William passed, but his absence is a presence I live with every day. It's not a sad thing, not anymore. It's just a fact, like the way the sun comes through this window every morning. I still live the life we built. I make my sourdough toast and I butter it right to the very edges, the way he liked. I drink my tea from the same worn floral cup we bought on an anniversary trip 50 years ago. These aren't just habits, they are conversations. They are the anchors that keep me from drifting away on the sea of time. People see an old woman living a simple life, but what I'm really doing is tending to a love story. And I've found that love is the most powerful nutrient of all. The story I'm about to tell you isn't really about food. It's about what makes a life worth living for a very, very long time. My days have a rhythm, a slow and steady beat that the world outside seems to have forgotten. It begins with the sun, which streams through this kitchen window and warms the old wooden floor, the same way it has for 60 years. I move slowly. My bones remember my age even when my mind forgets. The first real task is the bread. I slice a piece from the sourdough loaf, my hands know the right thickness by feel, and toast it until it's the color of autumn leaves. The smell fills this quiet house. Then comes the butter, cold from the fridge, and I spread it deliberately all the way to the very last edge of the crust. William always said that a life without buttered edges was a life half-lived. He was right. People see an old woman making toast. What they don't see is a sacrament, a quiet promise I make every morning to a life built on small, unwavering joys, a life that honors the man who taught me how to savor them. The afternoons are quieter. The silence is different then, deeper. At precisely 3 o'clock, the kettle sings its familiar song. This is tea time. It was always our time. I take down 2 cups from the shelf out of habit, but only one gets used now, the one with the faded floral pattern, its handle worn smooth by decades of our hands. I sit in my chair and my eyes will drift to the one across from me, the one with the permanent impression in the cushion where he always sat. It's not empty, not really, it's just quiet. I don't talk to him out loud. It's not that kind of conversation. It's a feeling, a shared stillness. I sip my tea and remember the sound of his laugh, the way he'd tap his fingers on the armrest. This daily ritual isn't about clinging to the past. It's about carrying it with me. It's the anchor that proves a love so big doesn't just disappear when a person does. The doorbell rang last Tuesday. It's a sound so rare in this house that it feels like a punctuation mark, a sudden exclamation in a long, quiet sentence. It was my great-granddaughter, Sarah, all bright eyes and hurried energy, a living embodiment of the world that rushes on outside these walls. She carried a large paper bag, a look of earnest, loving concern on her face. "I brought you some things, Nana," she said, her voice full of that youthful certainty that she was doing the right thing, the sensible thing. I smiled and let her in, watching as she placed the bag on the old kitchen table, the very same table where William and I had shared 60 years of meals. I could already feel a subtle shift in the air, a different rhythm trying to impose itself on the steady, familiar beat of my home. It was the sound of a world I no longer belonged to, knocking politely at my door. She began to unpack the bag with a kind of missionary zeal, lining up her offerings on the worn wood. There was a plastic tub of something called a buttery spread, its label proclaiming it was good for the heart. There was a carton of milk made from almonds, and a box of crackers that promised to be free of everything: gluten, salt, sugar, and, from the looks of them, joy. "This is so much better for you, Nana," she explained gently, tapping the plastic lid of the spread. "The doctor says you have to watch your cholesterol, and this has no saturated fat." She spoke with such conviction, such genuine love, that it almost hurt. She was trying to give me more years, but what she was offering felt like a subtraction of life. These sterile scientific packages looked like intruders in my kitchen, alien artifacts from a future I had somehow outlived, a future built on fear instead of flavor. My eyes kept returning to that plastic tub of pale, oily spread. And in my mind, I saw William's hands, strong and gentle, slicing a thick pat from a block of real golden butter on a cold winter morning. I could almost smell it melting into the warm, porous crumb of fresh sourdough, a scent that was, for me, the smell of safety, of home, of a love that was simple and true. This tub wasn't just a substitute for butter. It felt like a substitute for memory itself. A quiet, profound wave of sadness washed over me. A grief not for William this time, but for a world that had become so terrified of living that it had forgotten what life tastes like. Sarah saw my silence and mistook it for confusion. She didn't understand that she wasn't just offering me food. She was unknowingly trying to edit the most beautiful chapters of my life story, rewriting them with blander, safer words. It was in that moment, looking from the lifeless tub of margarine to the faded floral teacup on my shelf, William's teacup, that something shifted inside me. A quiet resolve began to bloom in the place where the sadness had been. I realized that my life, the one I had so carefully tended like a garden for over a century, was my answer. My rituals, my memories, my unwavering commitment to the small, profound joys of butter and bread and shared cups of tea. This wasn't just nostalgia, it was wisdom. And it was a wisdom that was being forgotten, buried under a mountain of fear and plastic containers. I looked at my sweet, worried great-granddaughter, and I knew I couldn't be silent anymore. I had to speak, not to argue or to scold, but to testify. I had to tell the story of a life lived without fear, for William's sake and for hers. After Sarah left, the house fell back into its familiar silence, but it was a different kind of quiet. It felt heavy, disturbed. The plastic containers she left on my kitchen table seemed to hum with a strange, sterile energy, like invaders in a sacred space. I ran my finger over the lid of the buttery spread. It was cold and unyielding, a dead thing. I thought of how Sarah's love for me was tangled up in fear of cholesterol, fear of fat, fear of the end. William and I, our love was never about fear. It was about abundance. It was about the richness of a shared meal, the warmth of a full stomach on a cold night. Her well-intentioned gift felt like a judgment, a quiet accusation that the life we built, the very life that had sustained me for over a century, was fundamentally wrong. It was a love I didn't recognize, a language of care I couldn't speak, and it left me feeling profoundly alone in my own home. I looked away from the table, my gaze landing on the worn floral pattern of William's teacup on the shelf. A deep ache settled in my chest, a feeling of profound loneliness that had nothing to do with being alone. It was the loneliness of being misunderstood. Had I failed? Had I lived this long, beautiful life so quietly that its most important lessons were invisible to the ones I loved most? All these years, I thought I was tending to a legacy, but maybe I was just tending to a museum that no one else had the key to. I remembered my own daughter, Sarah's grandmother, trying to convince me to buy a microwave years ago. "It's easier, Mom," she'd said. But I didn't want easier. I wanted the slow ritual of the stove. I had spent a lifetime resisting the world's rush toward convenience and fear, and now I wondered if, in my quiet defiance, I had isolated myself from the future entirely. But then a different feeling began to push through the sadness, something harder and clearer, like a root breaking through stone. It was a flicker of anger, not at Sarah, but at the world that had filled her with such fear. This wasn't about my health. This was about my history. That plastic tub on my table wasn't just an alternative to butter. It was an attempt to erase the memory of 60 years of breakfast with my husband. It was a suggestion that our simple, profound joys were mistakes, that the taste of our life together was a risk that should have been managed. They were trying to edit our love story, to sanitize it for a new, terrified audience. I looked over at William's empty chair, and I felt a fierce, protective loyalty rise in me. No, I would not let them. My life was not a mistake. It was a testament, and I would be its witness for as long as I had breath left to speak. My anger faded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind not emptiness, but a strange, quiet clarity. My gaze fell upon the old ceramic teapot sitting on the stove where it has sat for 60 years. It was time for tea. I moved toward it, my hands acting on an instinct deeper than thought. Filling it with water, the weight of it in my hands felt like an anchor. I set it on the burner, and the familiar click of the gas igniting was a sound of reassurance. I took down 2 cups from the shelf, his and mine, a reflex my body would never unlearn. I placed them on the table, right next to the plastic tub of buttery spread. It was a silent declaration. This small daily act wasn't just a habit. I realized in that moment that it was my armor. It was the most powerful medicine in this house, a quiet but unbreakable defense against a world that had forgotten how to live. The kettle began to hum, and the sound transported me. Suddenly I wasn't alone. I could see him so clearly sitting in his chair, a newspaper folded on his lap, looking up at me as I brought the cups to the table. He'd always wait for me to pour. He said the sound of the tea filling the cups was the sound of the day finally settling down. We didn't always talk much during our tea. We didn't have to. It was a shared silence, a comfortable space where we could just be. It was in those quiet moments over the steam rising from our cups that we renewed the silent contract of our life together. It was a promise that said, I am here, you are here, we are safe. For 50 years, 3 o'clock was not just a time of day. It was a place we went to together, a sanctuary built for 2, steeped in warmth and familiarity. Then came the day I had to visit that sanctuary alone, the first day after he was gone. I remember standing in this kitchen, staring at the teapot and feeling like it was an impossible mountain to climb. My hands shook so badly I could barely lift it. The thought of pouring tea into only one cup felt like a betrayal, a final physical admission that he was never coming back. A part of me wanted to put it away forever, to let the silence win. But another part of me, a part that sounded a lot like him, whispered that I had to do it. So I poured. I drank that first cup of tea alone, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. But as I drank, I understood. This wasn't a ritual of loss. It was a ritual of communion. It was my daily conversation with him, my way of telling him I was still here, still holding on to the life we built. And that's when I finally understood the real secret. It was never about the butter. It was never about the bread, or the potatoes, or even the tea. Those were just the vessels. The real nutrient, the one that has kept me alive all this time, was the love they carried, William's love, my love for him. The world is so busy searching for the perfect diet, the magic pill for longevity. They're analyzing molecules and counting calories, but they're looking in all the wrong places. They're treating the body as a machine that might break down, but they've forgotten all about the soul. You can't find the cure for loneliness in a laboratory. You can't find the antidote to a life without flavor in a plastic tub. The secret to a long life isn't what you put in your mouth. It's the love you hold in your heart. It's the only thing that truly lasts. The kettle whistled, a long, steady note that cut through the silence. I looked at the plastic containers on my table, these sterile monuments to a world I no longer recognized. There was no anger left in me, only a quiet, resolute calm. With a steadiness that surprised even my old hands, I stood up. I gathered the buttery spread, the almond milk, the joyless crackers, and I carried them to the pantry. I didn't throw them away. That would have felt too violent, too much like Sarah's fear. Instead, I placed them on a high shelf in the back, behind the jars of jam and preserved peaches from summers long past. They could stay there, out of sight. It was an act of quiet translation. I was telling my home and myself that I understood Sarah's love, but I would not be speaking its language. My kitchen would continue to speak the language it had always known, the language of warmth, of memory, of real butter melting into real bread. I returned to the table and poured the tea, first into his cup, then into mine. The steam rose between them, a fragile bridge connecting then and now. As I sat down, I realized this ritual had changed. It was no longer just a private conversation with a memory. It had become my answer. My life wasn't something I needed to defend. It was something I needed to declare. Every slice of buttered toast, every cup of tea, every meal cooked on this old stove was a sentence in my story, a story about a love that nourished more than any diet ever could. I wasn't just a lonely old woman tending to her memories anymore. I was a librarian, and this house was my library. And the most important book, the one I had to share, was the one that taught you that a life filled with small, unwavering joys could be long enough and strong enough to outlast almost anything. I looked over at William's chair, the worn fabric holding the shape of him. And for the first time in a long time, the ache in my chest was not one of loss, but of fullness. I finally understood that grief isn't a disease to be cured. It's just love with nowhere to go. And my love had a place to go. It went into the bread, into the garden, into the quiet hum of this house. It was in the taste of the tea on my tongue. He wasn't gone. He was simply translated. He was in the warmth of the sun on the floorboards, in the familiar weight of his teacup in my hands. I no longer needed the world to understand my choices. I didn't need to win an argument against fear. All I needed was this quiet room, this cup of tea, and the unshakable truth that the life we built together was still holding me, still feeding me, still keeping me whole. So, when people ask me for my secret, I suppose this is it. It's not a list of foods. It's a way of living. For over a century, I have chosen joy over fear every single day. I have chosen the warmth of a shared meal over the cold calculus of a calorie chart. The world will try to sell you a longer life in exchange for a smaller one, a life where you are always hungry, always worried, always denying yourself the very things that make the journey worthwhile. They were treating the wrong disease all along. The sickness isn't the butter on your toast. It's the guilt you feel for enjoying it. The poison isn't in the food. It's in the fear that keeps you from sharing it. My long life isn't a miracle of genetics. It is the simple, inevitable result of a life filled with a love so nourishing it has sustained me long after the man I shared it with has gone. My body is old, yes, but my soul has never gone hungry. It is never too late to unlearn that fear. It is never too late to choose a different way. The joy you have been told is your enemy is waiting for you right there on your own table. It's in the taste of a real strawberry ripened by the sun. It's in the smell of bread baking in your own oven. It's in the simple, profound pleasure of a meal made and shared with someone you love. Don't let them take that from you. Don't trade a life of flavor for a few more years of fear. My William has been gone for a long time, but our love story is still here. I taste it every morning in my toast. I feel it every afternoon in the warmth of my teacup. So I ask you, when you look at the years ahead, will you spend them counting what you've lost, or will you spend them savoring what you have?